All right, welcome back to Talking Giants, doing a Joe Schoen bye-week press conference reaction. Certainly not a press conference that is earth-shattering. I'm not allowing this press conference to change my overall thoughts and opinions on Joe Schoen in a positive or a negative way. I don't really let press conferences do that overall. This presser overall was around 22 minutes. He was almost 40 minutes late to the presser, and even after they rescheduled the time, they went over 5 minutes, and they were 5 minutes late to the rescheduled time. There is poetic justice to Joe Schoen being 40 minutes late. When Abdul Carter's being benched for an entire quarter against the New England Patriots just the night prior, and thanks to Dan Duggan, we know that Abdul Carter was benched due to being late to special teams meetings, and that's why he was benched against the Pats. So yeah, definitely a little bit of poetic justice. Joe Schoen almost 40 minutes late to his own bye-week presser. The main thing that I'm taking out of it, couple big themes. This is a man that has zero conviction in what he's doing and in his process. Where in the past, I think he's leaned on his process. He's leaned on, having belief and conviction in that. Whereas now, dude, like Jordan would push him and Pat Leonard would push him a little bit. And there was no effort to try and answer questions. Like Jordan asked him at one point, how do you defend 5 wins over the last 2 years? And it felt like he kind of panicked. And then he just went into, I appreciate the question. He repeated that 75,000 times. I appreciate the question. And he deflected and just defended that the job is attractive. And from the calls we've got, I think we're going to be able to fill the job. Like Jordan asked him, how do you defend those 5 wins? I appreciate the question. Hesitate, stumble, and then just starts listing off players on the roster that why a head coach would find this attractive. Jackson Dart, Andrew Thomas, Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, blah, 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 blah. There were a lot of people on Twitter talking about how he was like out of breath. I don't know if I got the sense that he was out of breath, but the dude was overwhelmed. An overwhelmed, kind of panicked Joe Schoen is a Joe Schoen that we saw here. And there is no defending what's happening here. So I'm not even expecting him to come in, and kind of glad that maybe he wasn't even a little pompous and defending what's happening here, because there is no defending what is happening here. And it makes you feel like you're taking crazy pills on why this team needs to start over. There is no defending what's happening here. How do you explain the results? What's your role in those results is something that Pat Leonard asked. Appreciate the question, deflect. The main thing that comes out of this, and like why is Joe Schoen a little panicked? Where last year he was pretty pompous, he was pretty arrogant in defending his process and defending what's happening here during bye-week pressers, end of the season stuff. This is a different Joe Schoen. And the main thing to kind of come out of this is ownership will evaluate the entire football operation at the end of the season. So I don't think it's clear, put a gun to my head. I think Joe Schoen's job is still safe as of right now, but I'm not walking away from this presser being like, it's automatically safe. I think it's safe. I'm no longer in the it's automatically. Ownership will evaluate the entire football operation at the end of the season, as they should. The main goal right now is to support Mike Kafka. Ownership decision to also fire Brian Dable. Joe Schoen emphasized that. A theme of that Joe Schoen brought up pretty often was, can we get the most out of what we have? That was a question that is something that we need to figure out. And Pat Leonard even pushed back on this too of, well, you're talking about can we get the most out of what we have, but have you ever thought of that what you have isn't a lot to begin with when it comes to the roster? There's no doubting that there's a good young core here, a lot of filled with top 10 picks and very high paid players, right? But there is no depth. There's draft picks that are unplayable. Kind of Pat Leonard mentioned Jalen Hyatt without mentioning Jalen Hyatt. Little disappointed that nobody mentioned Jalen Hyatt. Nobody mentioned Deonte Banks. Joe Schoen wasn't really pressed on that. Little disappointed about that. But was pressed on that, can you get the most out of what we have? Well, have you acknowledged that what you have may not be enough? And again, push back at that, rebuttal, appreciate the question, and deflect. There's clearly an emphasis in the building of coaching staff is going to fix it. We're going to get the coach in here. Very little acknowledgement of accountability in his own staff, in his own front office. He repeated multiple times that he is confident in his own staff and his own front office. Nobody's gotten fired there, basically, since you kind of got those lifer scouts out of here through the first 2-ish years here. There's been nobody that's been held accountable in Joe Schoen's front office for the results, but he put a lot of emphasis on, can we get the most out of what we have? And that is mainly in line and mainly talking about coaching, which I think is just so flawed over like how this roster is built, right? And even talking about making the same mistake twice. Mentioned that a lot towards the end. Joe Schoen won't make the same mistakes twice. He's already made mistakes more than twice. Like, you know what? You're right, Joe Schoen. You're not going to make the same mistake twice because you're bound to repeat these. You're bound to repeat these mistakes over and over again with the run defense. You've had 2 defensive coordinators now that have come in and your run defense is awful, yet there's been no serious investment to fix the run defense. None. Darius Alexander being a 3rd-round pick and no interior linebacker, substantial interior linebacker added since Bobby Okereke. And there were already questions on whether Bobby Okereke was good or not. That's a mistake that Joe Schoen, he's made more than twice. The 2023 draft class being completely unplayable. They've made the same mistake where they're pounding their chest about the draft class in their rookie years, making the same mistake of doing that, putting too much investment in those guys and not getting enough performance out of them. And then year 2 being like, oh my God, what the hell happened? So I hate the Joe Schoen won't make the same mistake twice line because that is so flawed because he's already made mistakes twice. He talked about Carter and Neighbors forming young men and people. I mentioned Carter being benched for missing special teams meetings. Talked about Jackson Dart and how there's a fine line of protecting yourself. And I agree with all that. And like I said, no questions about Jalen Hyatt. No questions about Deonte Banks. So the main things to take away from this Joe Schoen presser is this was not a very what's the word I'm really looking for here? This was not a very well-tempered, calm Joe Schoen. This seemed to be Joe Schoen in a little bit of panic mode. A Joe Schoen that did not defend his process, didn't go into any behind the scenes about that, defended his front office and his own staff while saying that a coach is going to come in here and try and get the most out of what we have. And his future maybe is not set. Ownership is going to evaluate everything at the end of the year, and we hope that they make the right choice. So those are the Joe Schoen presser thoughts. Hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you at the end of the week, middle of the week, probably Thursday for an episode. Peace.